here. It is officially started. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our Bible study on the book, Who Stole My Bible? This is a book by Jennifer Butler, and it is really an exploration of the story of how the Bible has been used in all kinds of ways. Mainly, she focuses on the rise of Christian nationalism and its use of the Bible, but also it is about how the Bible, in her view, is really a tool for resisting tyranny. And she goes through a number of reasons as to why she believes that. And so if you didn't read or you don't have the book, that is absolutely fine. So the way that we've structured this is so that actually this first session, you don't have to have read anything about the book or read anything in the book. Also, if you don't get the book, that is okay, because a lot of our conversations will be open enough to where you can still participate even if you haven't read the content, because a lot of the content is out in the news. It's right around us. However, some of the stuff I will read from the book, and then, you know, if you have read it, you can certainly bring in some of the content from what she's mentioned. So what we're going to focus on today is, what's the big deal with the Bible? What's all the hoopla? Why are people so interested in it? Why is there so much discussion around it? You could be thinking to yourself, well, obviously there would be, because we live in a Christian country, a predominantly Christian country. We live in a predominantly Christian world. Christianity is the largest religion in the world. So obviously the Bible's a big deal. However, there are lots of other religions, and their relationships with their sacred texts are really different. They don't necessarily believe that their sacred text is the only sacred text or the most correct sacred text and is the sacred text that has documented the origin of the entire universe. Not even all Christians believe that, right, about the Bible. And so partly what we'll discuss in this first session is how the Bible became the Bible that we know. We'll talk both about some quick history of the Bible and how it came to be formed. And then we'll also talk about how the Bible, after it was formed, became kind of a political flashpoint in a lot of different ways. And so, actually, before there was a Bible, before there was a Bible that was printed and circulated widely, most people got their information about Christianity through paintings and through preaching. And so what we're going to start with actually are some pictures. And so if you take a look at what's happening here, folks on Zoom, I don't know if you can see that, but let's just talk a little bit about what you see in terms of, let's just sort of build a data bank, if you will, of the images that you're seeing here.
Well, if that's supposed to be Jesus being baptized, there's a lot wrong with that picture.
Well, let's back it up. So what's making you say Jesus being baptized?
Well, the Holy Spirit coming down, the water. I'm assuming that that's John the Baptist.
Well, so let's even break it down more basically than that. We've got two people standing, right? We got some water.
Right.
Above there, you're naming that as the Holy Spirit. I think that's a fair interpretation, but what is represented there is a bird, right? Okay. There's a bird of some variety, well, probably a dove.
And the hands coming down.
And there's some hands coming down too, right? Absolutely. Okay, so we've got these two figures. One is holding something above the other. And then what's going on with the scenery? What do you notice about the scenery?
Well, that they're standing in water.
Standing in water.
There's two little angels over there, isn't it?
Yeah, there's two little people over there. They might be angels. They've got halos.
Yeah.
It sort of looks like they might be standing in front of a temple.
Maybe standing in front of a temple.
In that background in the back.
Yeah. Some kind of structure, some rocks that seem like they've been intentionally put together somehow. We've got maybe a palm tree on the left. It looks kind of deserty, right?
Yeah.
The right side looks more mountainy and a different landscape.
Yeah. Right.
It looks like it's got those are cedar trees or something like that.
Yeah, some kind of trees, for sure.
Well, then you've got a staff, which what appears to be a cross on top, which with John the Baptist is historically reversed.
Yeah, right. We've got this staff, this one person holding a staff with a cross on the top. And if you notice, kind of, in between his fingers, there's sort of a scroll
Okay.
with some writing
Yes.
on it. What the writing says is a little hard to make out. But from what I can see, it says ecce, which is Latin for look. And it probably says something to the effect on the scroll of, look, this is my son with whom I am well pleased. Sort of a refrain that you find in the Gospels in the scene where Jesus is being baptized. And so if you look next here, there it is. Here's another painting. What are you noticing here? Another dove, another possibly cedar tree in the back.
Kids grew up.
Yeah, those little kids who were kneeling down are now standing up and looking like a
And
dove.
that looks more like a ceremony
Yeah,
than the other one did.
yeah.
What's
that's
the
kinda more like a
person on the
ceremony.
way over on the right?
It looks like it's undressing.
Yeah, somebody's taking their clothes off over here.
Or washing or something.
Yeah. But we've got some similar things going on, right? Water down here, a person over here, holding a cup or a bowl, pouring water, a dove up above. These are two totally different artists working around the same time, but not exactly the same time, who are depicting the exact same scene. And you'd be able to pick that up pretty immediately because there are these little cues. You got the dove, you've got water, you've got the two people, you've got the way Jesus is depicted in the way that many people often think of the way Jesus looked now. And if you look at John the Baptist and his clothes, you notice they're brown and very simple. And remember what John the Baptist wore?
Animal skin.
Yeah, turned inside out.
Right.
So the furry part was on the inside. Yeah. Okay, so there's a language here, a visual language to help people understand these stories. And if
So when were these done? About what, 100?
these were in the 1400s.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, all of these would have been in the 1400s. What are you seeing here?
Is that Mary?
What makes you say maybe it's Mary?
Being just about the angel.
This figure pretty clearly is an angel, right? We've got the wings going on and kind of a halo.
And she's holding her body.
Yeah, she's kind of holding her womb right there. Yeah. Yeah. This is, and so in addition to knowing, we got an angel here, we've got this woman here holding her womb. She's also wearing blue, which was a color commonly associated with Mary. And
Got a halo.
she's got a halo.
Not many women were given halos
Right.
in paintings.
Yeah.
Right? I think she might be the only one. Right?
So we know she's pretty special. Yeah, absolutely. And there's also some words down here in tiny print. again, the words are clearly not the focus here. This is about giving us these visual cues, but also notice the way that this artist has kind of taken Mary out of what would have been humble dwellings in modern day Palestine and put her here in this kind of Greco-Roman scene. And
What about the angel's wings?
yeah,
That's
it's
so
kind of
interesting.
a rainbow situation
Yeah.
going on. Yeah, it's curious the way that people have kind of chosen to show divinity or sacredness or the otherworldly character of angels. Sometimes they do it through color, but we know pretty clearly that those are wings, right? And then looking at this one, we have a similar thing going on. Different artists. This is actually Leonardo da Vinci working in a similar time period as the other artist, who was Della Francesca, and he's done a similar thing. This does not look to be first century Palestine in some kind of humble dwelling. This looks kind of palatial, actually, with kind of a courtyard situation going on. But here again, we have a woman with a halo wearing blue, another figure over here with wings. So this is the moment when the angel Gabriel tells Mary that she's going to give birth to Jesus. And you notice here she's reading, because according to tradition, she was in her bed reading at the time. The likelihood that she would have been reading is very small.
Right.
Because books weren't really a thing back then, in this particular way. But what all these artists are doing are basically taking this story and making it more relatable to the people who would have been looking at the paintings. Changing the skin tone, the hair texture, the hair color, all of these different things, even the setting. This doesn't represent where Mary was in her life. It represents this kind of exalted character that tradition has given her. So these paintings aren't meant to be historical necessarily, but all of them point to a kind of truth. And truth is going to be really what we're talking about all throughout this Bible study, and certainly today. Any questions or thoughts about any of these paintings before we move on? Yeah,
I
Caitlin.
was going to say, I thought it was interesting that the two paintings vary in different expressions.
Yeah.
She looks more, she's like looking down, and then her arms aren't around her. She's more open.
Yeah. Here
They've had two different,
hands
she's
up.
having two different reactions or two different moments.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, a lot of
Very
different.
much more regal than that angle.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, Caitlin was naming the expression, the body language.
And also that hand gesture that she had on one of her slides, more of receiving, like receiving the information.
Yeah. And the
Yeah.
first one looks like she's almost bracing herself, or maybe caring for the womb. But in this one, she's sitting upright, and her hand is up in this posture of maybe reception or something like that.
And she's looking at the angel too.
Yeah, she's looking directly at the angel. Whereas here, she's kind of
Well, both of them have their arms over
They both are,
their
yeah.
chest, versus the other one where the angel has her hands up and sort of.
Yeah. It's true. And if you notice also what the angel's doing
Yes.
with its hands,
Yes.
it's that kind of posture of blessing.
Right.
And it's interesting to look at the whole tradition of Annunciation. That's what this moment is called, Annunciation paintings, because they really run the gamut of different ways of depicting this moment. Sometimes they look kind of intimate, actually, and on an almost sexual way, where Mary in some paintings is in the bed with the covers kind of disheveled and the angel standing next to her as if something had just finished. In others, Mary is depicted more like this, but they can get even more ornate and really emphasizing the kind of royal character that she had. And so again, is this an accurate depiction of what took place? Probably not.
I mean, she's
But that's-
very light-skinned and blonde, and
Yeah,
that's not likely to have been accurate.
absolutely.
Jesus either.
Huh?
And Jesus either.
Jesus was not.
I know.
color
And
that
we painted
they
him
describe.
blonde.
Yeah,
Light-skinned and blue-eyed. And
that's right. And so, in one sense, we can read those inaccuracies as people trying to kind of whitewash the story. In another sense, I think a more generous reading is that these are examples of people who are claiming this story and its truth for themselves.
Right.
You see Italian and painters who will depict the royal family being Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, with blonde hair and then dark hair. In the Netherlands around this time, they would depict them with red hair. So there's just a whole variety of different ways that artists have chosen to communicate something true about what's happening. And Caitlin, bringing up the human dimension, what are the feelings that are being communicated here? That's another thing that will kind of be running throughout our conversations as well. So, as we think about the Bible and the truths it communicates, as we think about its stories and we think about its laws and the poetry and all the different things, it can be kind of overwhelming. And so, I have what might be kind of an overwhelming question. I'm going to invite you to talk with someone nearby. And folks on Zoom, y'all can talk amongst yourselves. If someone, going to do that from another planet thing, if someone from another planet came and asked you, what is the Bible? How would you describe it to them? So take a moment and think about that, and then talk to one or a few other people nearby and explore that together.
What's your radical theory?
Huh?
What's your radical theory?
Folks on Zoom, you can feel free to unmute and maybe
that people
converse
made
a little
up
bit
to
with
try
each
to
other if you like.
explain things that were Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll at some point.
Okay. Why don't we talk just a little bit together? Anybody want to share some of what you discussed with your crew? How would you describe what the Bible is?
Dixie's asphalt's first.
Dixie.
It's a book that was created, like in all cultures, to try to explain the unexplainable. The creation, lightning, all these things, man didn't have a better word for it, so they created these stories to try to explain it. But all cultures did that. The stories were just slightly different if they were from South America or Asia.
Okay. So a way to help explain otherwise unexplainable phenomenon.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great.
I think that, I would, if I had to explain it to an alien, I mean, I understand it, I would say that they were ancient texts that, were written as tools for us to live our lives by.
Okay.
With rules, and stories that we can relate to. I don't know how else you can explain it to an alien.
Well, I appreciate everyone's just accepting that this alien somehow speaks English. And
Have a universal translator.
we've got, yes, we've got all the,
Touch somebody, then we can speak their language.
And understands what a book is.
that's right, exactly. Okay, so you also use an interesting word, which was they. Like, these are texts, plural, that were created to be a guide, in a way, to help people understand how to be in the world.
Well, in the Old Testament was about control. It was about control. People's eating habits, living habits, and things of that sort. I mean, a lot of the Old Testament is about rules and regulations.
Okay,
I
interesting.
think,
Yeah,
when I read it, I think about that.
yeah,
After we get past Genesis, the storytelling part.
yeah, interesting.
The New Testament is more, to me, is more like an outline of the teaching of Jesus, and how the teaching may apply to your life.
Okay, so you're also naming the two different parts of it. Okay, all right, great. Any other thoughts, folks?
If they didn't speak English, you could show them pictures.
Right?
There you go. Well, and the pictures would probably leave a whole lot out, right? Because it's hard to capture in a picture some rules,
An album.
some laws.
I'm sorry. Not a picture, an album.
Yeah. Well, and all of these paintings and the art that the Bible continues to inspire is mostly not about the rules that are in the Bible, the laws that are in the Bible, unless it's a depiction of someone receiving laws. And so, that's already getting into some of the questions that anyone who approaches the Bible is asking themselves. What's most important to me? The stories, the rules, the explanations, what have you. Any other thoughts about how you might describe what the Bible is?
Well, it was written by, we didn't talk about that at all, but they're stories, but they're just written throughout the ages and by different people. So
Yeah.
it's all different perspectives.
Right. So then not only are they different texts, this is sort of a compendium of different texts. These are different texts written by different people at different times.
Right.
But it
Okay.
seems like it's kind of a very moral and spiritual guide, culminating in the possibility that there is life beyond life.
Okay. So thank you, Pan. Pan's naming that it's a moral and spiritual guide that is pointing to the fact that there could be life beyond life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so now we have conversation about the afterlife too. Yeah. Well, these are all really helpful and I think fairly thorough. We could take all this together. It's a pretty thorough description of what this thing is. But I think as we've discussed, and I imagine as you all discussed amongst yourselves, it's kind of hard to explain what it is. Unlike most books, this isn't a book that was written by one person.
Right.
Unlike most books, this wasn't a book that was written at one time. Unlike most books, this isn't a book that has one genre. There's poetry and prose, there's laws, there's stories, there's all kinds of things. And so, if we kind of take a look at this book, let's do a quick history of the Bible. So, the biblical canon, what's known as the canon, are the books that actually made their way into the Bible. There were lots of other sacred texts that both the Hebrews and the first Christians held as sacred. There's a gospel according to Mary. There's a gospel according to Peter. There's a gospel according to Pontius Pilate. But those did not make their way into the New Testament. Only the gospels according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John actually did. There are lots of other texts that were on the list of possibilities, but did not actually make it into the canon. Same is true with the Hebrew scriptures. And in fact, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, the canon changed a little bit because people went through the process of dating those texts and recognizing that they were in fact authentic and decided to actually expand and shift the canon a little bit. And so what we understand as the Bible in terms of the specific texts that are in it was formed around 200 CE. And it was at that time kind of an assortment of different manuscripts that had been written and copied and written and copied in mainly Greek and Latin at that time. And then in the year 382, the Emperor of Rome said we need to have a standardized version of the Bible written in the form of Latin that most people understand. The forms of Latin that the Bible had been written in were all more ancient forms that were hard for people who did not have a literary education to actually understand. And so this was an attempt to standardize and also, in a way, democratize the Bible a little bit. Yeah, this was a...
I said it sounds like an early Reformation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this was a couple hundred years before then, but it was definitely that spirit of let's make it a little more accessible and also, again, more standardized. But still, that form of the Bible was not widely accepted until around the 1500s. So about 1100, 1200 years go by before most Christians decide, all right, we'll use the Vulgate Bible, is what it's called. Then, before that, though, a person named John Wycliffe decided to translate the Bible into English. It's the first known English translation of the Bible. Then, a few hundred years after that, comes the King James Version. And the King James Version is still widely regarded as the most authoritative English translation, mostly because of tradition. There have been other attempts to translate it, several, as I think a lot of us know, several attempts to translate the Bible into English. And there are all kinds of subtle differences among those translations. And because each of them has a different goal in one way or another. The New Revised Standard Version, which is the version that we most often read from in worship, was made in 1989, and it's often used in academic circles and more mainline Protestant traditions. There is a Catholic Bible or a translation of the Bible that Catholics mainly use. There's a translation of the Bible that Orthodox folks use. There's still a whole lot of different versions out there. And really, what it comes down to is that there's a matter of personal preference in it, too, in addition to the kind of religious traditional preferences that are part of people's choices as well.
Wasn't when they did the revised version though, didn't they go back to the Greek and make some corrections to explain things better?
Yeah, they made an attempt in the new revised standard version to go back to those original Hebrew and Greek manuscripts and to do a little more explanation about why certain things happen. So, for instance, the first Christians, who were all Jews, right, they were not reading the Hebrew scriptures in Hebrew. They were most likely reading them in Greek. And so that actually shaped some of the ways that they translated and interpreted some of what they described as the prophecies about Jesus. And so just a quick, interesting one, there are several. In the New Testament, it says that Mary was a virgin, and that was to fulfill the prophecy in Isaiah that the Messiah would come from a virgin. Now, the word that is translated as virgin is a Greek word that was itself a translation of a Hebrew word that folks understand now, and in the Hebrew world, was more likely meant to suggest a maiden, a young woman. But the way that it moved from Hebrew to Greek to English, we get virgin. And so that's partly how we get the whole doctrine of the Virgin Mary. And so the New Revised Standard Version, there are lots of little footnotes and things that help explain some of those translation issues.
Right.
Yeah. Another version that we sometimes use in worship is the Message. This is kind of a looser translation, and it was created over the course of from 1993 to 2002. It was sort of released in stages, and the attempt of the Message is to take the sometimes complicated grammar of these more faithful and direct English translations of these ancient languages and just make it a little easier to understand, a little more palatable to the modern day reader's ear.
So far, we're looking for that. I look for it under the Message Bible.
Mm-hmm. There's a website called Bible Gateway, and you can look up any passage in Scripture, and you can see it in any translation. And so if you just search for Bible Gateway, it'll come up, and you'll be able to see all the things. And you can actually look at particular passages and multiple versions of translations from those passages. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts about that very quick history of the Bible?
It's so amazing to me, the difference when one translates it as maiden versus virgin. I mean, the whole thing is predicated in many people's minds and in a great many of the Christian faiths as if one is a virgin, all the holies and all the things and all the cultural norms that one must or should, try and be as a young woman. And I mean, there's so much cultural stuff built on that
Yeah.
Where did this, was there any time really when this difference between maiden and virgin, was this the 382 AD thing, maiden and virgin?
No.
I mean, this is really key to how a young woman would, or how anyone would look at people and young women.
Yeah, it's really true, Pam. Well, to answer your question about was there a time in ancient Christianity where people were kind of aware of that nuance of translation? And I honestly don't know. However, if you look in the Gospels particularly of Matthew and Luke, Matthew especially will make these little side comments where he will say, or the author will say, and this was to fulfill the prophecy set out in Scripture. There's all these sort of justifications or these ways of making clear that Jesus is the Messiah by referencing back to Isaiah or other Hebrew scriptures. But again, these are folks who are reading those scriptures in Greek at that time. And so, but that brings up the question, though, Pan, of truth.
Right.
Did people really believe that Mary was a virgin that gave birth in this miraculous way? Did people really believe that an angel came down and had this conversation with her? Did people really read the Bible?
Oh, you froze. Tony, I don't know if you know, you're frozen. Hi, Marcia.
I guess we could talk amongst ourselves.
Hi, Marcia.
Hello, hi, Carl.
Maybe some more. Oh, hello, Erin.
Aaron. Yeah.
Conversation till.
Pan, I thought what you said was so spot on. I'm trying to get the gallery view so I can see everybody. Oh, hi. It's just over here. That's my dog. But I thought what you said was so spot on, Pan, because I was raised Catholic, and this idea of the virgin birth is like central. Sorry, y'all, it's been a long day. Central to the faith, and then kind of what you were saying is like how that has dictated standards for women across the centuries. That right? Is that kind of where you were going with it?
I was, and how it still
Hey,
does.
y'all.
Yeah.
Sorry, we got talking amongst ourselves.
So
Froze.
I clearly should have chosen a less controversial example because we could do a whole, maybe like for Christmas, we should do a Bible study on the Virgin Mary. Let me just say really quickly, not to cut off what sounded like a really interesting
It's fine.
conversation, but I was just naming how among early Christians there wasn't consensus around how to read Scripture, and we were talking about inconsistencies among the Gospels, and there were some ancient thinkers who said explicitly the truth is not lost or diminished because of these inconsistencies. And so here again, we have this question of truth and what it is and what it means. And I'm going to transition us to thinking a little bit about truth, which in our day feels like such a loaded word when there's so much debate about what is true, what is truth, what are the facts.
Right.
You know, we've got folks saying that we're in a post-factual, post-truth era. And so in a minute, I'm going to invite us to talk some about the ways that the Bible has been politicized, or you could say has continued to be politicized, because almost at every turn, for instance, the publication of the King James Version of the Bible was a highly political act. And every translation of the Bible, in fact, has been in some way shrouded in politics in one way or another. But before we move into that, was there anything else that we wanted to talk about in terms of biblical history in these translations?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
It's my understanding the Old Testament is divided into sections. The Mosaic Law and I can't go any farther than
Yeah.
that, but they're grouped.
Yes. So in the in the Jewish tradition, the Hebrew scriptures are divided into 3 parts. And so it's called the Tanakh. And that's actually an acronym that I'm not going to remember to name those 3 parts, the Ta, the Na, and the K. And so it basically divides into law, prophets, and writings. And so if you think about, the Mosaic Law, the Torah, what's named as the 5 books of Moses, and then there's the length of prophets, the Isaiahs, and the Amoses, and the Micahs, and what have you. And then the writings, the Psalms, the Wisdom of Solomon, and so on. Yeah.
And those
Right.
were all on like scripts. I mean, they weren't in a book form. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, and whenever we started numbering things in terms of the books,
Yeah,
trying to figure out how to do that,
that's
all of
right.
that was complicated.
Yeah, that's right. So Dixie was just naming some of the editorial realities about this project of creating the Bible. None of the Bible was on pieces of paper like this, it bound in a book until the 200s, 300s, around that time. Before then, it was all scrolls. And so, if you go deep into the history of how the Bible was formed, you'll see this word codex mentioned several times, and there's different codices that are assigned to different people, and they are often just fragments of old parchment that have just some writing that we can get a sense of what these texts might have looked like. And what you notice in looking at them is that, particularly with the New Testament, all in Greek, all in capital letters, with no numbers or chapter divisions. And so the verses and everything else, that's something that people added later on, really in the Middle Ages.
You know what I'm feeling right now?
Interesting.
How
All
manipulative
letters.
all
No,
of this could be.
No vowel
I don't
too.
like something.
no vowel.
Oh, let's put this in there. Oh, how can we control this situation? It just is. That's kind of been my take since the get-go with religion. It just seems like a tool for one group of people to control another.
Yeah. Well, TJ, you naming the adding and subtracting and the editing that I mean certainly happened.
And the interpretations.
And the
that's the thing, interpretation.
And there were no punctuation marks.
Right.
It
And
just went on and on. And didn't, how do you figure?
that's right. How do we know what's true if with all of these realities at play? And so, thinking about this question of the editing, one of the things that the New Revised Standard Version did, there are sections that you can see where they'll mention how this part that is traditionally in the Bible is not present in some early manuscripts.
Right.
They'll say things like that.
Yeah.
So at the end of the Gospel of Mark, the whole last several verses, there's a little note that says, this does not appear in some early manuscripts. And so trying to understand, was that actually supposed to be a part of it or not? Well, all these sorts of questions sort of came to a head in the late 1800s, early 1900s, as more and more people were beginning to approach the Bible from this perspective of what they called higher criticism or new criticism, which was this approach to interpreting the Bible that looked at the stories behind the stories, that looked at the context a lot more, that was attempting to do some of the conversating that we're doing right now. And also, what was happening around this time were ideas about the entire shape of the universe. This was around the time in which evolution was becoming more and more a popularized theory of how existence came to be. And so you have these two things happening together, where the world of science and the world of kind of literary criticism are moving together to just cast doubt on a whole variety of realities that people had just accepted as norms. And so what happens is this huge wave of reaction against that. And in 1910, a group of folks in Princeton Seminary, which was at that time, and I think maybe still is, a Presbyterian seminary, wrote what they called the Fundamentals, a testimony to truth, or a testimony of truth. And this is where we get the term fundamentalist, because people who read these essays and they went through basically every Christian doctrine, the fundamentals. It was a whole compendium of essays in which they attempted to refute all of the claims of higher criticism. There's a whole essay on higher criticism where they go and try to refute the claims of evolutionary theory. There's an essay about evolutionary theory. And they say that the Bible must be read literally, and that if it's not in the Bible, it's not true. And so here we begin to see this rise in fundamentalism as a whole movement. And this came to a head further, in fact, in popular culture, right here in Tennessee with the Scopes monkey trial, right? And just for those who may not have it fresh in your minds, the Scopes monkey trial took place in 1925 or so. And there was a teacher who was teaching evolution. And there was a law that had been passed in Tennessee banning the teaching of evolution. And so this teacher was prosecuted. And there were some kind of all-star lawyers and fundamentalists who came out to support this person's prosecution. And ultimately, this was sort of a test for the norms of American society. Suddenly, folks are having to really think hard about what they believe, about what the Bible says, about what science is saying, and make decisions about which was right, where was the truth. The fundamentalist movement has continued on, obviously, as we all know, and has shaped itself into a whole variety of sort of offshoots. And the kinds of issues that the fundamentalist movement or the fundamentalist movements have taken up have morphed and shifted. Evolution, teaching in schools, still obviously a very big issue, but what would y'all name as some other issues that, when you think of fundamentalist political concerns? Abortion. Yeah, absolutely. Abortion.
Birth control.
Birth control relatedly, yeah.
LGBTQ.
LGBT rights.
Rights.
Patriarch.
Patriarch. Yeah.
Patriarchy, absolutely. Yeah, women in leadership. The Southern Baptist Convention just a few years ago, or 1 or 2 years ago maybe,
Yeah, not long. Yeah,
not very long at all, said that women cannot be pastors in their denomination.
Well, recently, and this is important to me because I'm a librarian, the governor just it's just outlawed, for lack of a better word, for us to have in the libraries the words banned books, and so you can't have any programs, you can't sell anything that has banned books on it, because it's part of the anti-DEI. And this just came up recently. About to have a big fundraiser at Cosset Library, but had to change it 2 days beforehand because our theme, and that's was banned books. So now it has to be called Freedom to Read, but any displays have to be approved by a committee to make sure that they aren't in contradiction to what the governor has said is appropriate.
Wow.
I can't quite hear her.
Wow. Can you repeat that for Carl and me?
I will.
It sounds important.
Turn it up.
The 10 Commandments have to be
printed.
preschool all the way through.
Wow. Thank you, Jackie. Well, Carolyn was just naming how the governor of Tennessee recently signed an order that said no library in Tennessee, no public library in Tennessee can use the phrase banned books. And so she was naming that Cosset Library was about to have a big program around banned books, and they had to change it to freedom to read.
Well, we didn't change it. We just said we moved locations so that because that's a major thing for libraries is the acknowledgement of banned books and the impact of that. So we were able to move it, but it's not just the banned books. It's displays that might display only African American collection or certain kind of collections. So there's like this committee now, and you have to. The librarians at the branches have to send it into the committee to make sure it's appropriate because there have been threats of firing people or closing libraries if they don't go by this new edict.
Some of the libraries in protest took their displays completely down and left the shelves empty, and they got in trouble for that.
Yeah.
No, my husband just left, leaving, working for the library, and he was talking about that. That was one of the big issues, that now they can't do anything without this big committee in Memphis telling them it's okay to do it.
So they're saying that there's a committee now that has to pre-approve certain kinds of arrangements of books.
Or displays.
Or displays of books.
What they sell.
And what's being sold at the libraries and what have you. And then Jackie was mentioning how in Arkansas, the Ten Commandments must be posted in every classroom. And so certainly information, truth, facts, I mean, this is what is at issue right now in our society. Yeah. Dixie.
Well, I mean, there's such a big deal. One of the biggest deals initially was about the fact that the earth was not created in 7 days. And archaeology and all of this is showing how old the earth is, and about when the dinosaurs were here and about when the people were here. I mean, it's all contradicting that little view, that very limited view that God created in 7 days, like we think of a day. A day could have been 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years. We don't know. But it's like all of the science is just contradicting that one. And that was the biggest challenge for a lot of these folks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those were the first challenges, I guess.
Well, and so as these challenges around science and as we see now around certain social norms are around gender and around sexuality, but then also around bodily autonomy and all of the rest of it. These are now the hot button issues where folks are saying we need to retreat to something firm, something fundamental. And so in a certain view, what we could understand happened back in this time period when the Fundamentals was published in 1910, was that this was a time period in which the widely accepted norms were being tested and challenged in a wide variety of ways, and people needed something to grab onto, and what these folks grabbed onto was the Bible. And so, the Bible has taken center stage in Christianity in a way that it really hadn't in years past, in centuries past. The Bible's always been kind of the center of gravity of Christian faith. However, the move to read it literally is sort of a newer thing if you look at the entire history of the faith. And so as we think about truth and as we think about this book, who stole my Bible? One of the things that we're going to be doing is going on this journey with Jennifer Butler, who's going to do what I would call kind of biblical fan fiction. For those who don't know, fan fiction is when you take a story and then you decide to write more about it. You take Game of Thrones and you want to know what actually happened to Jon Snow, and so you write more about that. she sort of does that in a way where she takes certain scenes from the Bible and writes about them in the voice of one of the characters or someone who observed that scene. And so we, in our last 15 minutes here, we're going to look at how she does that with the story of Pontius Pilate. And I'm going to pass around these print-offs. There you go. You can just take one and print it. Folks on Zoom, can I have one? I should have kept one, thank you. We're going to be looking at John chapter 18, verses 28 through 40, if you want to look that up. Otherwise, you can just listen to us read it. It's just 3 paragraphs.
John 18, what'd you say?
28 through 40.
Oh, it's at the top. Your page.
It's all right. I love when I get easy questions. Okay, so let's read this out loud together. I'll read the first paragraph and then somebody just jump in and start reading the third and then so on. John chapter 18, verses 28 through 40. Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. It was early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the headquarters, so as to avoid ritual defilement and to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews replied, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated the kind of death he was to die.
Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priest have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom does not belong to this world. If my kingdom belonged to this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here."
Pilate asked him, "So, you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. And everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Pilate asked him, "What is truth?"
John 18, what?
What's the
I find no case against him. But you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. You want me to release to you the king of the Jews? They shouted in reply, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a rebel.
Okay. Oh. Yeah. What, if anything, jumps out at you as you read this, hear it?
Well, somebody was throwing the Jews under the bus.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I read a book that said that this was deliberately done later because they needed Roman support and they didn't need Jewish support, so Jews were convenient scapegoats if this was to be a universal religion.
Yeah. Interesting.
It's a book called Zealot.
Oh yeah, by
Yes,
Reza Aslan.
I read that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What else? What else stands out to you, if anything?
Pilate didn't want to take any responsibility.
Right.
Pilate didn't want to take any responsibility. Yeah, for sure. Sammy?
Was there a second page to this?
No.
No?
No, that's the whole thing. That's actually the end of that chapter. It's a curious ending, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like leaves you hanging out.
I know, it's a cliffhanger. Yeah. Well, there's that moment in there where Pilate says, "What is truth?"
Right.
And how would y'all answer that question?
That'd be John 11.
Jesus doesn't answer it. That's right. And so we could read that in a variety of ways, I think. But Jesus does not answer the question.
The answer is it's
Okay,
Right.
Dennis says it's complicated. Yeah. What complicates it in your view?
nothing in this world is simple. There are many different perspectives. There are many different interests for anything that happens or any condition. There are not necessarily two sides to the story, but there might be 17 sides.
Right.
Right.
So I'm curious about the very end of this and the fact that that handing Jesus over to this crowd was not good enough. They wanted a rebel, but in my side, Jesus was a rebel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in other translations it says, TJ was noticing that it's interesting that they wanted Barabbas, the rebel, and TJ was saying that, well, in my view, Jesus was a rebel. In other translations, it says Barabbas was a murderer, and that he was caught up in the violent riots that had happened in Jerusalem in anticipation of Passover. So there were people, in addition to the way that Jesus was resisting, there were other people who were resisting the Roman Empire.
Right.
And they had taken up arms. And the Passover was routinely a time in which revolt would take place. And so that's partly why you see in other places in the Gospels, it talks about why there was such an intense Roman presence there, was because the Romans were preparing for Passover to happen, and they wanted to quell any violence that might have broken through. And so in thinking about this question of truth, Jennifer Butler, in chapter 7 of her book, which I'm not going to invite you to read as part of this conversation over the course of our next 3 weeks, but if you'd like to read it, please feel free. The title of that chapter is Knowing Your Text. And in this chapter, she talks about how one of the strategies of empire and authoritarianism is the manipulation of truth. And she talks specifically about Donald Trump, who this was published, anybody remember when this was published? This was published in 2020.
Right.
So Donald Trump had been president for 4 years already, but he had not yet been reelected. But she quotes him in this chapter, actually well before he became president. She quotes a passage from his book, The Art of the Deal, where he writes, "Play to people's fantasies. People may not always think big themselves, but they can get very excited by those who do. That is why a little hyperbole never hurts. People want to believe that something is the biggest, the greatest, and the most spectacular." And so what she ends up doing with this text is really interesting, because according to the Gospels, we get this picture of Pontius Pilate as this sort of bystander who's just, he washes his hands. It's the Jews who wanted to kill Jesus, which actually begins a whole tradition of kind of an anti-Semitic reading of this that blames Jesus' death on Jews. But she takes it in a different angle. So I'm just going to read this passage from chapter 7 as we close for tonight. Here's the title that she has for it: Our Past, No Justice for the Innocent. The man healed my mother, and now he is standing trial. For what? I wondered. Rebellion was in the air, and everyone was suspect. We were living under a curfew. Pilate, the governor, had brutally squashed any opposition to the ways of the Romans. No one was allowed to gather. Despite the pleadings of my mother, I set out for the trial, hoping that Pilate would rule in favor of this healer, Jesus. If nothing else, I would show my support. It was the least I could do. Perhaps it was futile, as mother said, but Jesus showed me that every act of love has ripple effects, even if we can't always see them. Living under occupation had made me forget that. We were all so fearful. We kept our heads down and forgot each other's faces. If our eyes were on the muck, we could not lift our gazes to the heavens. I wanted to have hope. Jesus had not called for violence or armed insurrection. He taught me to turn the other cheek, to help the least of these. Were this so wrong? Maybe Pilate would dismiss the charges. Jesus was answering questions. He looked sad but calm. My kingdom is not of this realm, he says. I heard Pilate say, Aha, then you are a king. He was trying to corner Jesus. I held my breath. You say that I am. I have come into the world to testify to the truth, Jesus replied. I had a sinking feeling. What is truth? Pilate smiled cynically. Now my blood ran cold. The Roman Empire was gradually taking over all aspects of our daily lives. Many were worshiping Caesar as Lord. It was hard not to. Pilate was demanding absolute loyalty to the Roman Empire. You couldn't even buy bread to eat without bowing to this megalomaniac. To resist imperial reality, we called Jesus, not Caesar, Lord and King. We had sung hosannas and waved palm branches as he rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. It had felt good to morally rebuke the Romans and their puppets who left our people destitute. Next, Pilate smiled, but there was no warmth in his eyes. He grunted cynically. So she has a really interesting take on what Pilate's moves are there. And again, this is all grounded in this chapter about truth, about the ways in which authoritarians have constantly sought to confuse and disrupt people's ability to access the truth. And so she talks about different strategies for accessing truth. She says that truth isn't something that we just go out and read on the news. These days, we have to discern it. We have to do additional research. And one of the things that she also says is that we have to observe Sabbath. That Sabbath can be a strategy of resistance to take a break from all of the media that gets put in front of our faces so that we have time to discern and energy to discern. And so we're gonna keep on with this book. For next time, we're gonna read just a couple of chapters, which I'll describe in a minute. But by way of closing this part of the conversation, as we think about the ways that the Bible has been stolen in her view, and the way that this text has been politicized, I just want to end with a little bit of facts, as far as I understand them, about the Trump Bible. If you may have seen this in the news, but Donald Trump has endorsed a particular version of the Bible. It's not a unique translation of the Bible. It's called, I can't remember. It's known as the Trump Bible, but it's called something about, there's something that celebrates America in the title. I can't remember. And so when you look at the cover, there's an American flag waving on it, and it was actually put together by a country music star. And he wanted to use the New International Version, that translation of the Bible, but the evangelical publishing company that owns the rights to that translation would not let them do it. Okay. And so they ended up with the King James Version, which is in the public domain. So anybody could publish a King James Version. And so what's unique about the Trump Bible is that in addition to the Old and New Testaments, it also includes the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Bill of Rights. No other constitutional amendments make it in, by the way. Only the first 10 So nothing about the abolition of slavery or the Equal Rights Amendment or women's right to vote or the presidential term limits.
Right.
Yeah, that's not in there. Just the first 10, the Bill of Rights. And now, just to be clear, it's called the Trump Bible, but Trump doesn't own it. He endorsed it, though, and he was paid to endorse it to the tune of $1.3 million. And they've actually republished new editions of it at different pay grades. And I don't exactly understand what the different pay grades afford you. And I think that's the highest grade where you get, I think then they call that the veteran level. And that's $1,000. And then they have the standard version of it is $60 or $70. And there's this really interesting person who reviews Bibles on YouTube. And he reviewed it and he got into a lot of trouble because he had a very negative review. And mainly, it really didn't have much to do with the politics of it, but it says that it's genuine leather. And he's like, this is not genuine leather. It says that it was made in America, but he can't find any reference to where it was actually made. And there's some factual, or there's some typos in it also. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, exactly. But still, people thought he was just some raging Democrat who was against Trump. And so, anyhow, thinking about this text and the ways it has been politicized, what I'm excited to talk with you all about are the ways that Jennifer Butler helps us think about the Bible in a whole new register, in a way that gives room for resisting tyranny instead of the Bible being a tool of tyranny. What she actually wants to say is that these stories, these teachings, can help us, particularly in times like now. And so the next time we get together, I'll invite you to read chapters 1 and 2. And you can read the introduction also if you'd like. But most of what we'll discuss are chapters 1 and 2. And then if you would like to, if this is something that you think you'd like to be a part of for the remaining weeks that we do it, if you'll just write your email address on this piece of paper or put your email address on the chat or just email me, then I'll be sure I'll get you the course outline so you can know kind of which chapters we're going to read on what dates and things like that. It's not a terribly long book, but we're also not going to read all of it. So there'll be kind of chapters here and there that we'll skip.
How many weeks will this go on?
This will go on for 3 more weeks. So November 19th will be our last time together.
I'm just curious, because 5 weeks would put you before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we'll end November 19th, and we'll go each time about 75 minutes. Just so you have a sense of the timing and what have you. And folks on Zoom, I'm sorry again that we didn't get that link into the newsletter. We'll be sure to do that in the upcoming newsletters. And it's going to be the exact same link every time. And so even if you have an old newsletter, you can still capture it that way too. I'm sorry about that confusion. All right, friends. Well, with all that said, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for giving me something to think about in the middle of the night, the Trump Bible. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, check out the Trump Bible, or at least reviews of it.
Oh, if I could make a little plug for Burke's Bookstore.
Yes, please.
I ordered this last Thursday, so the day after you told us about it at the end of the book of the previous session.
Yeah.
And it came in today.
Yeah.
So if you order it tomorrow, you'll have it by next.
And when I was buying mine,
Okay,
said,
that's
well,
great.
We just had 4 more orders. I think we're going to have to order some more.
Yeah.
Okay.
I ordered.
I probably should have given Cheryl a heads up that we were doing this, but I ordered my copy from there, and then, yeah, anyway.
Well, PDFs were circulated.
Oh, thank you for that, Carolyn.
But I
Yeah.
felt guilty about depriving her of the royalties from this book, so I went out and bought it.
Sure. Thank you. So yeah, for those online, you can still get a copy of the book. Dennis says it takes about 6 days, or
Yeah,
it took
from Burke.
That didn't take
from
us
Dirk
that
from
long.
Burke's. It didn't take me that long
We
either.
ordered on Monday or Tuesday, and it was in on Friday.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, great. All right, y'all. Thanks again. See you later. Bye, everybody on Zoom. Bye. I know, we're gonna turn that.